Why did they laugh so hard at her? That's what you might have asked yourself if you stood there that morning, shoulder to shoulder with 30 Marines on the firing line at Camp Pendleton. The sound wasn't just laughter. It was sharper, crueler, the kind of noise that cuts before a single bullet flies, before a single word can defend itself. The laughter rolled across the range like thunder, bouncing off the steel targets set thousands of meters away. And at the center of it all stood a woman who, at first glance, looked far too ordinary for this place. Her name was Emily Carter, 28 years old, 5'6", worn gray shirt clinging to her frame, fatigue still dusted with dried mud from another life she rarely spoke about. In her hands, or rather, on the cold steel table before her, sat a weapon that made even hardened Marines double over. It wasn't the weapon itself that drew the mockery, it was the color. A Barrett .50 caliber rifle, painted a shocking, almost childish rose. "Is that a Hello Kitty toy?" Gunnery Sergeant Michael Rodriguez barked, his tattooed arms crossed, voice dripping disdain. He didn't whisper. He projected the way an announcer does when he wants a stadium to laugh along. And they did, every one of them. Phones were raised, live streams already running, fingers eager to capture what they thought would be humiliation. Somewhere in that crowd stood Corporal Madison Brooks, Force Recon, sharp cheekbones, immaculate bun, and 50,000 Instagram followers. She turned her camera, her voice sharp as glass. "Okay, family," she sneered into her live stream, "we've got ourselves a civilian who thinks she's a sniper. Brought her Barbie rifle to a Marine qualification. Let's see how fast she embarrasses herself." The comment feed exploded with laughing emojis, cruel jokes scrolling faster than Brooks could even read them. But Emily Carter didn't look up, didn't flinch, didn't offer a single word. She moved with deliberate calm, setting down her dented rifle case, adjusting straps, unpacking tools with the rhythm of someone who had done this too many times before. Her hands trembled as she worked, a small shake that drew more ridicule. "Look at those shaky hands," Brooks crowed. She couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. The crowd roared again. But not everyone was laughing. Master Sergeant Jake Sullivan stood near the ammunition station, his eyes narrowing. He'd seen tremors like that before. Afghanistan, 2012. A forward operating base under siege, a medic who saved their lives despite hands that never stopped shaking afterward. Nerve damage, trauma. That rhythm, 4.7 seconds between each twitch. It wasn't fear. It was history written on the body. Still, the taunts kept coming. $20 says she drops it before she even hits the firing line. A lance corporal shouted, tossing bills into the air. Phones angled in, eager for content. But Emily kept working, pulling out battered shooting glasses with faintly flickering lenses, setting down a notebook filled with wind charts and equations that looked closer to graduate physics than ballistics. None of it impressed the Marines. To them, it was all just theater before failure. Rodriguez leaned closer, eyes narrowing on her frame as if studying prey. "I'll give you 2 minutes to pack up and get off my range," he growled. "This is for real Marines, not Instagram influencers." And finally, Emily spoke. Her voice was calm, soft, but sharp enough to cut through the wall of jeers. "I'll need about 15 minutes to set up." The silence lasted only a breath before the crowd howled even louder. 15 minutes. Brooks nearly fell over laughing. "Honey, you could have 15 hours and still miss past 100 meters with those shaky hands." The betting pool swelled. Odds ballooned 100 to 1 against her. Rodriguez grinned, sensing blood. "All right, here's the deal. You put 1 round on target at 1,000 meters. You can stay, you miss, you're gone for good. Deal." Emily didn't even look up. She murmured almost to herself. 6,000 meters. The laughter doubled. Some Marines clutched their stomachs, gasping for air. "Lady, the world record is 3,500, Rodriguez barked. Canadian Special Forces, perfect conditions, specialized ammo. You're not just crazy, you're mathematically impossible crazy. Phones captured every second. Live comments exploded with ridicule. But Sullivan wasn't laughing. His gaze followed her movements, the way her fingers brushed a set of dog tags beneath her shirt. A ritual only veterans knew, a silent prayer, a connection to ghosts no one else could see. He saw the way her breathing shifted, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Combat breathing, trained, disciplined. And every tremor she carried seemed to time itself into stillness when it mattered most. "Colonel," he whispered as a new figure arrived, Colonel Patricia Hawkins, her presence cutting through the noise like a blade. "That woman is using phantom protocol." Hawkins froze. The words hit harder than any rifle crack. "Impossible," she muttered. "Phantom protocol is classified beyond top secret. Only 12 people on Earth know it." "Then make it 13, Sullivan replied, his voice low, steady, certain. At the firing line, Emily lowered herself into position. Graceful, precise, methodical. She set the Rose rifle, checked her notebook, adjusted her glasses. Her breathing synchronized with the tremor. Every pause a perfect window of stillness. Rodriguez barked again, his voice more nervous now than mocking. 10 minutes, princess. 10 minutes until physics makes a fool of you." The laughter in the crowd faltered. Something about her movements unsettled them. Too calm, too precise, not the chaos of a civilian out of her depth. And then Emily whispered 6 words. "Clear the back blast area." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. The kind of command that made even the most skeptical Marine step back without thinking. Rodriguez laughed nervously. "Back blast, lady, this ain't a rocket launcher." But Sullivan was already waving people further away. His instincts screamed louder than mockery. Something big was about to happen. The countdown began. 10 seconds. Phones lowered. 5 seconds. Fog lifted just enough to reveal distant steel plates 6,000 meters away. Barely dots, barely visible. 3 seconds. Emily's finger settled on the trigger, light as a feather. 2. Her tremor paused, perfectly timed. 1. The rifle sang. Not the sharp crack of a normal Barrett. Deeper, heavier. A sound that bent the air. The recoil swallowed, dampened as if the Rose rifle absorbed it whole. A shimmering vapor trail stretched across the range. 8.7 seconds of silence. Through spotting scopes, Marines saw the impossible. A hole appeared dead center in the target 6,000 meters away. Then another plate behind it. Then another. The round tore through 5 slabs of steel rated to stop .50 caliber fire. Silence crashed across the range. Not the quiet of training, the stunned silence of reality breaking apart. 30 Marines stood frozen, jaws slack, phones trembling in their hands. Rodriguez's voice broke the stillness, his whisper cracked and fragile. "That's not possible." And for the first time all morning, no one laughed. Only Emily Carter, lowering her rose-colored rifle, engaging the safety, collecting the brass casing with trembling hands, not even glancing at the crowd. The sound of laughter was gone. What replaced it was something deeper, a silence heavy with realization, confusion, and a growing fear. Because they all knew something had just shifted. And the woman they mocked was not who they thought she was. Who was she? That was the question hanging in the air, heavier than the smoke curling from the Rose rifle's barrel. 30 Marines who had laughed themselves hoarse now stood frozen, unable to reconcile what they had just seen. A 6,000-meter shot. A bullet punching through not 1 but 5 slabs of reinforced steel. A feat beyond math, beyond records, beyond reason. Rodriguez, the loudest voice, the harshest skeptic, could barely find his tongue. That's not possible," he whispered, almost as if speaking too loudly would break whatever fragile reality still held. Emily Carter said nothing. She simply lowered her rifle, engaged the safety, and knelt to collect the single brass casing lying on the concrete. Her hands trembled again, but this time, no one dared mock her. Phones were still raised, but no one recorded anymore. The instinct to capture content had been drowned by something older, more primal. Awe, fear, respect. Corporal Madison Brooks slowly lowered her phone, her live feed still rolling but forgotten. 20,000 viewers waited for commentary. None came. Even she, the queen of mockery, was silent. Only one man moved with purpose. Master Sergeant Jake Sullivan. His breath hitched when he caught sight of ink, a glimpse of a tattoo peeking beneath Emily's sleeve as she leaned forward. Not just any ink. A mark he had only ever seen in classified briefings, whispered in dark rooms far from sunlight. His chest tightened, his mouth went dry. "She's got the mark," he rasped, stepping toward Colonel Hawkins. The colonel turned sharply. "What mark?" "Phantom 7, Sullivan said, his voice breaking through the stunned quiet. Hawkins's blood ran cold. She knew that name. Everyone in certain circles did. Phantom Team 7, the most classified unit no one ever admitted existed. Officially, they'd been wiped out in Kandahar 5 years ago. Their after-action reports were buried so deep, only ghosts could find them. "That's impossible," Hawkins whispered. "Phantom 7 is dead. I read the report myself." "Then explain what we just saw," Sullivan shot back. His eyes locked on Emily. Whispers rippled through the Marines. Confusion, rumors, Phantom. What was Phantom? Their training had prepared them for insurgents, for combat, for chaos. Not this. Not legends stepping out of graves. Rodriguez finally forced his voice to steady. He stepped forward, still trying to reconcile pride with what his eyes told him. "Who are you?" he demanded. His voice cracked on the last word. "Really, who the hell are you?" Emily lifted her gaze. For the first time all morning she met his eyes, and something shifted in her expression, the mask slipping, just for a heartbeat. What he saw wasn't triumph, it wasn't arrogance, it was exhaustion, pain, secrets too heavy for one person to carry. "Someone who should have stayed buried," she said quietly. Her voice cut through the stunned silence like a knife. "Someone who made a promise I couldn't keep hidden." Before anyone could respond, the sky itself seemed to change. The sound came first. Low, heavy, a rhythm of rotors cutting through the morning air, but it wasn't the steady, familiar hum of marine transports. This was sharper, faster, more aggressive. Thub, thub, thub. Heads turned toward the horizon. And then they appeared. Helicopters, black, unmarked, flying too low, too fast. No numbers, no insignia, ghost birds. Emily's entire body stiffened. Her jaw tightened. Recognition flared in her eyes, and something else too. Not fear, not surprise, resignation. She snapped her head toward the Marines. For the first time all day, her voice carried command, crisp and unquestionable. Inside the range building, now. The Marines hesitated, confusion clouding their instincts. Who was she to give orders? A trembling-handed woman with a painted rifle. But Sullivan didn't hesitate. His combat instincts roared louder than doubt. "You heard her," he barked. "Move." Captain James Harrell echoed the command, his officer's tone snapping the hesitation in half. "Inside, Marines. That's an order." Boots thundered against the concrete as Force Recon scrambled toward the reinforced building. Weapons grabbed, gear slung over shoulders. Rodriguez stayed a second longer, locked on Emily. "Who are you?" he repeated, his voice low, desperate now. Emily looked at him, really looked, and let the mask slip one more time. Her voice softened, but the weight of it nearly buckled him. "Someone you were never supposed to meet." The helicopters grew louder, beating the sky into submission. The Marines rushed inside, slamming the heavy doors shut. The reinforced walls swallowed the outside light, plunging the interior into a red glow as emergency strips hummed alive. And then the snap. Every light flickered, died. Darkness. A second later, the emergency red returned, dim and harsh. Radios crackled once, then silence. "EMP," muttered Derek Miller, one of the tech-minded corporals, his face pale. "Localized, they just fried every comm line on base." Emily didn't waste time. She opened what looked like a standard first aid kit. Inside wasn't bandages, but tools that hummed with strange, alien energy. She assembled them with trembling hands, each piece clicking into place with precision that betrayed years of practice. Within seconds, she had built a small radio unlike anything they'd seen before. Colonel Hawkins stared. "What the hell is that?" "Insurance," Emily replied, her voice steady. She didn't look up as she worked. "Listen carefully. In about 60 seconds, Black Ops operators are going to breach this building. No insignia, no legal orders, no hesitation." Her words landed heavy, like lead in the chest. "Their mission is simple," she continued. Her eyes finally lifted, scanning every Marine in the room. "Eliminate everyone here, erase me from existence, and erase anyone who saw what I just did." Disbelief rippled through the group. Tyler Webb, the young lance corporal who had bet money on her failure, blurted out, "Erase you? Why, what are you?" Emily met his gaze. Her voice was quiet, but it carried like steel across the room. "Phantom Team 7. We were betrayed by our handler, sold out for cash and politics. I was the only one who lived." The room seemed to shrink around her words. Colonel Hawkins's face drained of color. "Your handler who?" Emily's eyes hardened. "Marcus Bishop, CIA." Hawkins staggered back a half step. "Bishop disappeared 5 years ago." "He didn't disappear," Emily cut in. Her voice was bitter now, sharp with years of grief. "He cashed out, and now his masters are here to clean up the mess." The first explosion rocked the northern door. The steel buckled, sparks flying into the red-lit haze. "Positions," Captain Harrell barked. Marines snapped into cover, weapons raised, outnumbered, lightly armed, but not helpless. The second charge slammed against the frame. Smoke poured in. And then the breach. Black-clad operators stormed through, weapons slick and silent, suppressors coughing death into the haze. They moved with precision, with purpose. Not amateurs, not insurgents. Shadow Division. And Emily Carter, the trembling-handed woman they mocked, raised her Rose rifle, her body shifting into a rhythm older than memory. How do you hold your ground when shadows pour in to erase you? That was the question hanging in the air the moment the northern door buckled under fire and smoke filled the room. Marines, trained for war, found themselves staring at an enemy they couldn't name. No insignia, no flags, just black-clad figures moving with surgical precision. Suppressed weapons coughed in the dark, each shot designed to kill without echo. The first Marine dropped, a round tearing through his shoulder. He screamed, clutching the wound, but his brothers dragged him to cover. Bullets thudded into the walls, sparks raining down. "Shadow Division," Emily said flatly, her voice steady even as chaos erupted around her. "They won't stop." And then she moved. The Rose rifle, mocked only minutes before, snapped up in her hands. Her tremor vanished the instant her finger found the trigger. The rhythm of her body became something more, a metronome of precision. Every 4.7 seconds, a window of perfect stillness. Every 4.7 seconds, a shot. The first round punched through an operator's chest plate, dropping him instantly. But the effect was stranger than death. His night vision gear sparked, frying in a burst of static that blinded the men near him. They clawed at their helmets, cursing in muffled rage. The Marines saw it, and for the first time since the breach, hope cracked through the fear. "Northwest corner," Emily called, her voice slicing the noise. Rodriguez spun toward the corner, rifle raised, but Emily's shot was faster. One, then two shadows fell before he even aligned his sights. "Reloading," she shouted. Sullivan moved without thinking, shifting to cover her flank. It was instinct. Two soldiers who had never trained together moving as if they'd fought side by side for years. Rodriguez crouched beside them, disbelief still warring with adrenaline. That's impossible. Emily's eyes flicked to him, sharp even under fire. Focus, you cover, I'll break them. He obeyed, no more questions. Smoke rolled thicker, curling under the emergency lights. Flashbang, Miller shouted, hearing the pin snap. Emily's rifle cracked, intercepting the grenade midair. The flash lit harmlessly above the room, the shockwave dissipating into nothing. Miller froze, wide-eyed. How the hell? Practice, Emily answered, her gaze already tracking the next threat. Marines returned fire, their rounds not as precise but determined. Tyler Webb, once the loudest in mocking her, found himself laying down suppressive fire with shaking hands. His shots weren't pretty, but they forced Shadow Division to dive for cover. The firefight stretched into minutes that felt like hours. The operators expected an easy sweep, an erasure mission, clean and fast. Instead, they found Force Recon holding the line, teeth bared, backed by a ghost from their darkest files. Every 4.7 seconds, Emily's rifle sang. The rhythm carved through the chaos, a heartbeat of death that the operators couldn't outmaneuver. Each shot did more than kill. Her experimental rounds crackled with faint red light, frying equipment, detonating grenades midair, piercing armor like tissue. Rodriguez's chest heaved as he reloaded, sweat streaking down his face. He caught himself glancing at her, the woman he'd mocked, the Barbie sniper, and he realized with a sick twist in his gut that she wasn't fighting for glory, wasn't fighting for revenge. She was fighting to keep them alive. Back left, breach team moving, she shouted, snapping another round into the haze. Two shadows dropped. Vasquez, pressed against the wall, yelled over the gunfire. How many more? Too many, Emily replied, calm but grim. Her rifle cracked again. An operator crumpled, dragging another down with him. The air was thick with cordite, blood, sweat. The red lights painted everything like a nightmare, shadows dancing, faces smeared in crimson. Marines bled, but none gave ground. And through it all, Emily Carter never faltered. Her tremor returned only in the spaces between shots, each window of stillness sharpening her focus, turning weakness into strength. Rodriguez ducked as a bullet sparked off the wall above his head. He pressed his back against the concrete, chest heaving. You're not supposed to exist, he muttered, almost to himself. Emily ejected another casing, eyes hard. Neither are they. Another explosion tore through the southern wall. More shadows poured in, their movements coordinated, ruthless. The Marines braced, tightening their perimeter. But the operators were hesitating now. Confusion had begun to fracture their precision. Their comms buzzed with static every time Emily fired. Their gear malfunctioned, night vision fried, grenades detonated too early. They were trained for enemies who played by the rules of physics, not for a trembling woman with a rose rifle rewriting the rules in real time. Sullivan caught her eyes between shots. In them he saw something that sent a chill down his spine. Not pride, not power, but grief. She wasn't fighting to prove herself. She was fighting because she had already lost too much. The firefight raged for 6 minutes, though to those inside it stretched into eternity. Marines shouted, weapons cracked, operators fell. And then silence. Smoke drifted in lazy curls across the room. 14 operators lay scattered on the floor, armor smoking, weapons fried. The survivors dragged their wounded back through the breach, retreating to the waiting helicopters. The thup-thup-thup of rotors filled the air again, but this time fatting, pulling back, beaten. Inside, Marines held their ground, chests heaving, weapons still raised. Emily lowered her rifle. The tremor returned, worse now, her body shaking as the adrenaline ebbed. She leaned against the wall, the rose barrel gleaming in the red light. 7 rounds left, she whispered almost to herself, her voice cracked, the weight of it pressing down. Rob would have been proud. Rob, Vasquez crouched beside her, confusion softening into concern. Emily nodded, tears welling but refusing to fall. Robert Carter, my brother, he built this system. The rose color was his joke. He said, if I had to fight in a man's world, I might as well stand out. Her voice broke, but only for a heartbeat. Then she straightened, forcing steel back into her tone. He died in Kandahar, gave me time to escape. This was his legacy. Rodriguez stepped forward, his pride shattered, his voice low. I owe you something, he said, eyes downcast. An apology and a tattoo. Emily managed the faintest smile, shaking her head. You owe me nothing, you fought, that's enough. The Marines exchanged looks. They had mocked her, laughed at her, tried to drive her out. And when death came for them, she had stood at the front, shielding them with the very hands they had ridiculed. The battle was over, but everyone in that room knew it was only the beginning. What happens after the gunfire stops? That was the question weighing heavier than smoke inside Range 7. The air reeked of cordite, sweat, and burned electronics. Marines leaned against shattered walls, weapons still raised, adrenaline still coursing through veins that couldn't accept the silence yet. Bodies lay across the concrete, black-clad operators, their mission unfinished, some dead, some unconscious, all left behind in a battle that was never supposed to happen. Rodriguez pressed his back against the wall, chest heaving. The man who had mocked loudest, who had laughed hardest, now looked at Emily with something he hadn't felt in years: humility. You saved us, he said quietly, almost as if the words themselves hurt to push out. I owe you something, an apology, a reminder. He swallowed hard. A tattoo. Emily shook her head. Her hands trembled worse now that the fight was over. The adrenaline gone, her body surrendered to exhaustion. You don't owe me anything, she whispered. You stood with me. That's enough. But Rodriguez pressed. His voice cracked, stripped of pride. I ridiculed you. I humiliated you. You saved my life anyway. That's honor I can't repay. Emily gave him the faintest smile, small and tired. Do what you feel you need. But know this, when it mattered, you fought beside me. That's worth more than ink. Around them, medics moved quickly, tending to wounds, wrapping bandages, checking pulses. No one spoke much. Words seemed cheap in the aftermath of something that had nearly killed them all. Vasquez crouched beside Emily, her eyes soft, searching. You said Rob would have been proud. Who was he? Emily's gaze dropped to the rifle, its rose paint chipped and scarred, gleaming faintly under the red lights. She exhaled, the tremor in her hand steadying as she spoke his name. Robert Carter, my brother, he built this system, the recoil dampening, the experimental rounds, all of it. She swallowed hard. The rose color, that was his joke. He told me if I had to fight in a man's world, I might as well stand out. He believed, if I was going to be underestimated, I should let it be my greatest weapon. Her voice faltered, but she forced herself on. He died in Kandahar, bought me time to escape. He told me once that technology should save lives, not take them. That was his dream. And when Phantom 7 was betrayed, he gave everything so I could carry it forward. The room fell silent again, this time not from shock, but from reverence. Every Marine who had mocked her felt the weight of her story settle like stone in their chest. And then the ground trembled. Not from enemy fire, not from helicopters, but from the rumble of armored vehicles. Boots thundered outside, orders barked, reinforcements swarmed the range. This time it wasn't shadows, it was base security, real Marines. The heavy door groaned open, and through it strode General Patricia Morrison, a two-star whose reputation preceded her. Sharp eyes, unyielding presence, a leader who carried command like armor. Her gaze swept the scene. Unconscious operators sprawled across the floor, force recon Marines battered but alive, and one woman with trembling hands clutching a rose-colored rifle. Colonel Hawkins stepped forward, snapping a salute. Ma'am, this is Staff Sergeant Emily Carter, Phantom Team 7. She just led us in repelling an illegal CIA operation on marine soil. The general's brow furrowed. Her voice carried authority like thunder. Phantom 7. That unit was declared KIA in Kandahar, every single one of them. Emily straightened. Despite the exhaustion dragging her body down, she snapped to attention. For the briefest moment, her trembling hands went still. She saluted. Reports of my death were fabricated. Ma'am, I survived. The general studied her for a long, heavy silence. Her eyes searched Emily's face, weighing truth against the impossible. And then, in front of everyone, she raised her own hand in a perfect salute. Welcome home, Sergeant. The room seemed to breathe again. For 5 years, Emily Carter had carried her burden alone, a ghost, unseen, unacknowledged. In that moment, with tears finally streaming down her cheeks, she wasn't a phantom anymore. She was a Marine again. By the afternoon, containment was impossible. Madison Brooks's live stream, cut short during the firefight, had already gone viral. Snippets of the impossible 6,000-meter shot spread like wildfire across the internet. By nightfall, 25 million people had seen it. Veterans began flooding social media with their own stories of being mocked, underestimated, overlooked. Hashtags emerged, SRO Sniper, Never Judge, echoing her lesson across the country. What began as cruel laughter at a Rose rifle transformed into respect across the nation. Rodriguez kept his word. The next morning he sat in a tattoo chair, grimacing as ink burned into his arm. 2 words etched forever, never judge. Other Marines followed. Each chose their own words, their own reminders. Respect first. Look deeper. Honor always. Quiet traditions born of a day they would never forget. Madison Brooks, shaken to her core, deleted months of shallow content overnight. Her followers watched as glamour shots vanished, replaced by stories of overlooked veterans. Within a year, her audience doubled, not for selfies, not for staged bravado, but for truth. And Tyler Webb, the kid who had bet money on Emily's failure, approached her days later, nervous, contrite. "Teach me," he said softly. "Not just the shooting, the way you stood tall when everyone laughed. I've been the worst kind of Marine, tearing others down for laughs. I want to change." Emily studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "The tremor in my hands will never go away," she said. "I learned to work with it, not against it. That's your first lesson. Weakness can become strength if you let it." The Marines listened, not as skeptics anymore, not as mockers, but as students of someone who had stood when it counted. And for the first time, the betrayal of Phantom 7 began to surface. Files unearthed, hidden evidence, financial trails leading back to Marcus Bishop, the handler who had sold them out. 3 days later, Bishop was arrested at a private airfield, caught trying to flee the country. His capture unraveled a web of corruption that bled across intelligence agencies. 14 others went down with him. The truth could no longer be buried. Phantom 7 was finally acknowledged, their names restored, their honor recognized. At Arlington National Cemetery, new headstones gleamed in the sunlight. Families gathered, tears falling as truths long denied were finally spoken aloud. Robert Carter's stone bore an inscription chosen by his sister, inventor, friend. His legacy lives on in every impossible shot. Emily stood at attention, trembling hands wrapped in white gloves. She saluted until her arm ached, until grief and pride blended into something new, peace. The Marines who had once mocked her stood beside her now, silent, heads bowed. And for the first time, Emily Carter wasn't standing alone. What do you do when the world finally sees you? For Emily Carter, the answer didn't come in a ceremony or a headline. It came in the quiet moments afterward. The nights where sleep still slipped through her trembling hands. The mornings where the weight of her brother's rifle sat heavier than steel on her shoulder. She had been a ghost for 5 years, and now, suddenly, she was visible again. Recognition brought attention, cameras, questions, rumors, but none of that mattered as much as the moment she stood in front of a formation of young Marines at Camp Pendleton, sunlight catching the Rose rifle resting across her chest. "You'll hear about the 6,000-meter shot," she told them. Her voice carried steady calm, even as her hands betrayed her with their rhythm. "You'll hear about the rifle, the impossible math, but none of that is what matters." The recruits shifted, waiting. "What matters is this," Emily continued. 30 Marines stood beside me when it counted, even after mocking me, even after doubting me, and together we lived." Her words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They cut deeper because they carried truth. "You're going to learn to shoot, yes," she said. "But more than that, you're going to learn to see, to look past appearances, past prejudice. Because the most dangerous person on any battlefield isn't the one who looks dangerous. It's the one you underestimated." The formation was silent, not the silence of boredom, the silence of respect. For the first time, Emily wasn't fighting alone. She was teaching, passing on what she had carried in secret for too long. Her tremor, once the source of mockery, became part of her instruction. "You'll see this shake," she told them, holding up her hands. "Most of you think it's weakness. You're wrong. It's rhythm. It's timing. It's a reminder that even what's broken in us can be sharpened into precision." She showed them how to breathe with it, how to find stillness in imperfection. And slowly, one by one, Marines began to see her not as the woman with a painted rifle, but as the instructor who turned scars into lessons. But outside the range, the world was shifting too. The video of her impossible shot continued to spread. By the end of the week, it had crossed 50 million views. News anchors replayed the footage, their voices caught between disbelief and awe. Commentators debated physics, military secrecy, the ethics of classified programs. Veterans, though veterans didn't debate, they understood. Across the country, they raised their hands in salute to a woman who had turned mockery into resilience. They flooded forums and feeds with their own stories of being underestimated, overlooked, dismissed. Emily Carter became a symbol they didn't ask for but needed, proof that dignity doesn't always shout. Sometimes it trembles. At Camp Pendleton, a quiet tradition began. Marines who had been there that day started getting tattoos, words inked into skin as reminders. "Never judge, respect first, honor always," a permanent mark of humility. Rodriguez, once her loudest critic, was the first. The words burned into his forearm like penance. "I'll carry this," he told her, "so I never forget what arrogance cost me." Emily only nodded. She didn't need apologies, she only needed truth. Madison Brooks, too, was changed. The Instagram influencer who once streamed mockery to thousands now found herself unable to look at her own reflection. She deleted months of shallow content, rebuilt her platform from the ground up. She began telling stories of veterans who had been ignored, voices that had gone unheard. And to everyone's surprise, her following doubled, not because of glamour, but because of meaning. Even Tyler Webb, the youngest, carried his transformation openly. He sought Emily out, eyes downcast, shame etched on his face. "Teach me," he begged. "Not just the shooting, the way you stood tall when everyone laughed. I've been tearing others down for cheap laughs. I don't want to be that Marine anymore." Emily studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded once. "The tremor in my hands will never leave. But I learned to make it part of me, not fight against it. That's your first lesson. Weakness can become strength if you let it." For the first time, Tyler listened with his whole heart. Meanwhile, justice moved forward. Files Emily had hidden for years finally came into the light. Evidence of betrayal, trails of money, recordings that pointed directly to Marcus Bishop, the handler who had sold Phantom 7 for politics and profit. 3 days later, Bishop was caught at a private airfield, bags packed for escape. His arrest tore open a web of corruption that stretched far across the intelligence world. 14 others fell with him. The betrayal of Phantom 7 could no longer be buried. Their names were restored, their honor returned. And at Arlington National Cemetery, fresh headstones were unveiled for her fallen teammates. Families gathered, tears streaming as truths long denied were finally spoken aloud. Emily stood before her brother's stone. The words cut deep but healed at the same time. Inventor, friend. His legacy lives on in every impossible shot. She saluted until her arm ached, trembling hands locked in dress-white gloves. For the first time in years, grief and pride didn't fight inside her. They blended. The Marines who had once mocked her stood with her now, silent, shoulder to shoulder. And in that silence, Emily Carter wasn't a ghost anymore. She was a Marine, a sister, and perhaps most of all, a teacher. What do you say to a grave that's been waiting for years to be spoken to? That question haunted Emily Carter as she stood at Arlington National Cemetery, her trembling hands wrapped in white gloves, her body locked in dress uniform that felt heavier than any armor she had ever worn. The sun was bright, merciless in its clarity. Rows upon rows of white stones stretched into the horizon, each one carrying a story that once breathed, laughed, and bled. Now among them stood fresh markers. Phantom Team 7, her team, her family. For 5 years, their names had been buried under lies. For 5 years, she had carried them alone. But today, their truth had been carved into stone. Emily's eyes locked on one in particular, Robert Carter, her brother, her anchor, her other half. Inventor, friend. His legacy lives on in every impossible shot. Her chest tightened as she saluted, the motion sharp despite the tremor threatening to betray her. She held it until her arms screamed, until tears blurred her vision, until the ache in her muscles became part of the ritual. She whispered words no one else could hear. I made it, Rob, I kept it alive. The joke, the rifle, the fight, I stood when I shouldn't have, and they stood with me. You were right. Even mocked, even underestimated, we mattered. Behind her, silence stretched. Not the cruel silence of mockery, not the stunned silence of disbelief, but the heavy, reverent silence of Marines standing at attention, heads bowed. Rodriguez was there, his tattoo still raw on his arm, never judge. Madison Brooks stood beside him, no phone in hand, no live stream to distract her. Her eyes glistened as she stared at the rows of stones, her face stripped of vanity. Tyler Webb, once eager for cheap laughs, stood stiffly in dress blues, a young Marine changed by humility. Colonel Hawkins, Sullivan, Vasquez, they were all there, standing shoulder to shoulder. A unit forged not by training but by survival, by failure, by redemption. For the first time since Kandahar, Emily wasn't alone. She lowered her salute slowly, her arms trembling, her breath ragged. Grief and pride fought inside her chest, and for once neither one. They blended, became something whole. She placed a gloved hand on the stone, feeling the cold granite under her palm. You told me once technology should save lives, not take them. That was your dream, and maybe now it will. She stepped back, her eyes sweeping the other stones. Names that had lived, laughed, fought beside her. Names she had carried in silence. Now the world carried them too. The ceremony ended, but Emily remained long after most had gone. The Marines lingered nearby, unwilling to leave her completely alone but giving her distance, respect. And in that moment she felt something she hadn't in years, the weight easing just slightly. Not gone, never gone, but shared. Days later, the rifle itself was placed in a museum at Camp Pendleton. Encased in glass, bathed in light, the rose-colored Barrett became a paradox. At first glance, visitors laughed. A Barbie gun, children giggled. Adults smirked, snapping selfies with mocking captions. But veterans reacted differently. Some froze, eyes wide, recognition flooding old wounds. Others saluted quietly, their hands trembling as memories surfaced. A few broke down entirely, tears spilling as they remembered their own battles against doubt, dismissal, and silence. They knew. They knew that garish Rowe's rifle wasn't a toy. It was a tombstone and a torch, a reminder that strength can hide in unexpected places, that the most underestimated soldier might be the one who saves you. Years passed. The rifle remained behind glass, misunderstood by many, revered by the few who knew. Marines brought their children, telling them the story in hushed tones. Veterans touched the case as though it carried warmth. And every now and then, someone would stop, stare, and whisper a quiet thank you. Because Emily Carter's shot wasn't just about 6,000 meters. It was about piercing through prejudice, shattering arrogance, proving that dignity doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it trembles. Sometimes it wears scars. Sometimes it's painted rose. And while the rifle became a symbol, Emily's life shifted too. She taught, she trained. She stood before generations of Marines, her presence steady, her words carrying lessons no textbook could offer. They learned to breathe through fear, to find stillness in imperfection, to see past appearances. And slowly her tremor, once mocked, became a badge of honor, proof that even broken things can hold precision. But late at night, when the barracks were quiet and the world forgot her name, Emily still felt the weight of silence. She still traced the tremor in her hands, counting the rhythm like a metronome of ghosts. She still whispered Rob's name into the dark. Because some scars never leave, and some promises never stop aching. How does time remember a soldier? Not the reports, not the medals, not the ink on a page, but the scars that ripple outward long after the rifles are lowered. For Emily Carter, time remembered her in the faces of the Marines she trained. She walked the firing line at dawn, the California sun spilling over the range. Her Rose rifle, the same one once mocked as a toy, gleamed faintly under the light, though it no longer fired. Its chamber had been sealed, retired from war. Yet she carried it like a standard, a relic and a reminder. Recruits stiffened when she passed, not out of fear, out of respect. "You'll hear stories," she told them, her voice steady despite the tremor still dancing in her hands. The 6,000-meter shot, the firefight at Range 7, the headlines. She stopped, her gaze sweeping across the young faces. Some eager, some nervous, some skeptical, the same look she had once endured from Rodriguez, Brooks, Webb. "But that's not the story," she said softly. "The real story is 30 Marines who mocked me in the morning and fought beside me by nightfall. That's the story that matters." Her lessons weren't just about aim, they were about perspective. Don't mistake appearance for weakness. Don't mistake silence for absence. The most dangerous person on any field isn't the one who looks the part. It's the one you underestimated. She showed them how to work with flaws instead of against them, how to find stillness in a shaking hand, how to turn scars into strength. And over time, her tremor, the flaw that once defined her humiliation, became the heartbeat of her teaching. Years blurred, but her influence only grew. Marines left her range not just with sharper marksmanship, but with sharper humility. They carried her lesson into combat, into leadership, into life. Meanwhile, the Rose rifle remained behind glass in the museum, misunderstood at first glance. Tourists still laughed. "A Barbie gun," they scoffed. But veterans never laughed. They stopped, saluted, and whispered quiet thanks. The rifle had become something more than steel and paint. It had become a mirror, reflecting arrogance to some, resilience to others. And Emily Carter herself became a paradox. A woman who wanted no fame but could not escape it. A Marine who carried scars but offered strength. A soldier who trembled but never fell. 5 years after the firefight at Range 7, a reunion was called. Not a parade, not a ceremony, just a quiet hall, plain walls, chairs arranged in a circle, the kind of room where laughter could breathe without echoing. Rodriguez was there first, the ink on his arm long healed, the words "never judge" etched deep into his skin. He rolled up his sleeve as if to remind himself of the day his pride had been shattered and rebuilt. Madison Brooks came next, no longer the influencer chasing shallow fame. Now an advocate, her platform dedicated to veterans whose stories would otherwise go unheard. She carried no phone in her hand tonight, only respect. Tyler Webb entered, his once boyish face hardened by years, stripes now on his sleeve. He was known among younger Marines as a mentor, the kind of sergeant who lifted others instead of tearing them down. Sullivan, Vasquez, Hawkins, they came too, faces older, lined with time but marked by the bond of that morning. And then General Morrison, now retired. She moved slower, but her presence carried the same weight. She had seen wars. She had carried burdens. But she had never forgotten the day a trembling woman with a rose rifle rewrote what honor looked like. When Emily entered, the room stilled. She was older now, her hair streaked with silver, her tremor unchanged. But her presence had deepened, heavy with a kind of quiet gravity that made words unnecessary. Morrison raised her glass first. Her voice cracked with age but carried strength all the same. "To the Rose Rifle," she said, "and to the woman who taught us that honor isn't about perfection, it's about standing when it counts." Rodriguez lifted his tattooed arm, the ink catching the light, "to never judging." Tyler Webb raised his glass, "to second chances." Madison's voice softened, reverent, "to seeing clearly." Emily's eyes shimmered. She lifted her glass, her hand trembling with its eternal 4.7-second rhythm. "To Robert Carter," she said, her voice breaking just enough to remind them she was human, "who believed technology should save lives, not end them. And to all of you for proving Marines don't abandon anyone, even someone mocked for carrying a Rose rifle." Laughter followed, not the cruel laughter of that morning, but warm, inclusive laughter, the kind born of family. Outside, the sun dipped low over Camp Pendleton. Through the windows, its light caught the museum glass where the Rose rifle gleamed. Forever misunderstood at first glance, forever revered by those who knew. Inside the quiet hall, they raised their glasses again, not to a weapon, not to a record, but to dignity. Because dignity doesn't always speak. Sometimes it acts, sometimes it bleeds, sometimes it trembles. And sometimes, if you're lucky enough to witness it, it paints itself rose. What do we leave behind when we're gone? Not the uniforms, not the medals, not even the headlines that flicker and fade. What remains is smaller, quieter, a trace of who we were carried in the hearts of those who choose to remember. For Emily Carter, that trace was sealed behind glass. The Rose rifle sat in the Camp Pendleton Museum, gleaming under the lights. A Barrett .50 caliber weapon painted in the color of mockery, or the color of defiance, depending on who you asked. Visitors passed by every day. Tourists paused, laughing as they snapped photos. "A Barbie gun," they chuckled. Children giggled, tugging at their parents' hands. At first glance, it seemed ridiculous. But not everyone laughed. Veterans would stop mid-step, their smiles fading into stillness. Some saluted quietly, lips trembling as they whispered words no one else could hear. Others broke down, tears streaking their weathered faces as memories resurfaced. They knew. They knew that rifle wasn't a toy. It was a symbol, a reminder that strength can hide in places no one expects, that the soldier who looks weakest might be the one who saves you. Time moved forward, as it always does. Emily's hair silvered, her step slowed, but her voice remained steady when she taught, her tremor still marking rhythm in her hands. She never sought fame, never asked to be remembered. She only wanted her brother's legacy to mean something. And it did. The Marines she trained carried her lessons into the world. Some went to combat, some became leaders, some left the Corps and built lives beyond uniforms, but each carried the same words etched into their hearts: don't mistake appearance for weakness. Don't mistake silence for absence. The most dangerous person isn't the one you see coming. It's the one you underestimate. They passed those words to others, like torches in the dark. Years later, when Emily's time finally ended, her funeral was not a spectacle. No grand parade, no cameras, just Marines and veterans standing shoulder to shoulder, saluting as her casket was lowered into the earth beside her brother. Her hands, even in rest, trembled no more. But her rhythm lived on. At the museum, the Rose rifle remained. Tourists still laughed unaware, but veterans still stopped. Marines still saluted, and every now and then a child would tug at their father's sleeve and ask, "Why is it pink?" And the father would kneel, his voice quiet, reverent. Because she wanted to stand out, and she did. Sometimes the child would grow quiet, staring through the glass, sensing something bigger than they could understand. And sometimes the father would whisper the words he could never quite explain. "She saved people. She taught us to see." In time, a tradition formed. Marines who had been trained under her guidance, or who had heard the story whispered through barracks and battlefields, would visit the rifle on the anniversary of that morning. They would leave tokens, patches, folded notes, dog tags etched with words like respect and never judge. The museum staff cleared them away each night, but the tokens returned the next day. The cycle never stopped. And so the rifle lived, not just as a weapon but as a vessel. Of memory, of grief, of dignity. And as the years turned to decades, Emily Carter became more than a Marine, more than a sniper, more than Phantom 7's survivor. She became a lesson. A reminder that scars don't define weakness, that trembling hands can still carry impossible strength, that dignity doesn't always roar. Sometimes it acts, sometimes it bleeds, sometimes it trembles, and sometimes, just sometimes, it paints itself rose.